in the words of the Grand National Starter, I think they're all in and locked and loaded. Can I welcome you to this session on technology, agriculture, food and farming? Those of you who don't know me, I'm George Freeman, former Minister for Life Science and the initiator of the UK government's agri-tech industrial strategy. And of that, I'm particularly proud because when I suggested it to ministers of the day, the question went up, what is agri-tech? And since we launched that little strategy, this country is now becoming home to a number of serious global investors. We've put about 200 million from government, and agri-tech is becoming a real thing. And I want to say something about that by way of introducing our four speakers. Let me just put this into context. I was, as some of you will know, a very loud Remainer. And Michael Gove paid me a compliment last year of saying, you're now the model convert. Personally, I wasn't convinced that Brexit was a sensible move, but I'm now committed to making a success of it for two reasons. Firstly, I think if the political class went back and told the electorate they were wrong, we'd unleash the most phenomenal raspberry on democratic politics. But secondly, because the one thing about Brexit, and I think you felt it in this room today, that really inspires is the opportunity to stop blaming others and to take responsibility and take it as a moment of energy to redouble our commitment as a country to the things that we were doing, weren't doing enough, weren't doing fast enough, and weren't doing urgently enough. So I'm here today as a messianic advocate of a Brexit, but not like it's been talked about in the last year and a half. A Brexit that inspires those who didn't vote for it, a Brexit that brings the country together, a Brexit that re-energizes us and our politics and our economy, a Brexit that the people who didn't vote for it look back in a few years and say, now that, I didn't realize that's what it was going to look like. And let me frame it within the context of this discussion. I come from a farming background. I've lived in 50 years. I've watched the CAP. I've watched British farming be told what to do by Europe and largely do what it was told, and the policy change. I've seen a lot of the environmental degradation that's come from clunky regulations coming out of Europe. I would argue that if you wanted to take one policy area where Europe's control system has let us down most, this is it in food, farming, fishing, and British land use policy. And I'm incredibly excited because it seems to me, having then had a career in technology, that there's an incredible opportunity for us here to do some really important things. Firstly, to end the stale political dichotomy between those on the one hand who've argued for green farming, for green agriculture, for green land use, and those who've argued that that is anathema to industry and commercial farming. Completely wrong. Today we're all in this together. It's about resilience, it's about minimizing footprint, it's about minimizing plastics, water, pesticides, and that unity of purpose. Show me any farmer, any commercial business that wants to maximize inputs. I think you'll struggle. Everyone now wants low input, efficient, maximum productivity, and if you look at British agriculture, our productivity has been falling. So there's an opportunity here for us to finally bring the two together and insist that lean, green, modern, resilient farming can deliver both the environmental promise and the productivity promise. Secondly, provocatively, I think there is an opportunity here for us to frame our own regulatory paradigm for 21st century agriculture. If you look at what's coming, smart precision spraying, low-till, satellite-guided tractors, genetic traits that will allow us to have crops that will grow in the desert, disease-resistant crops that don't need spraying, technology that you can just spray the plant that has the disease. This is going to blow a coach and horses through our traditional regulation, just as in medicine, pills that digitally send a signal back on their own absorption. It completely shatters all the FDA regulatory. Is it a device? Is it a drug? Is it a diagnostic? Guess what? It's all three. And there's a regulatory opportunity for us, which I think we ought to be thinking about how we grip. Of course, we need continuity now with our European markets, but there's an opportunity for us here to really grip it over the next few years. And thirdly, I want to suggest that there is something at the heart of this, which is about focusing on the consumer, not the producer. And in the end, I think the focus on the consumer will bring all this together. Most consumers, when they buy an apple or a pint of milk or a bag of flour, want to know the provenance. They want to know that it's come from a supply chain. They want to know that the very best of monitoring of the system. They want to have reassurance that they're buying something that comes from a good supply chain. And tech allows us to give them that reassurance. And I dream of the day where we give people an environmental quality mark that is properly based on science and properly based on the water, the plastic, the soil compression, the whole supply chain. And that's why when I launched the Agritech Industrial Strategy, we put agrimetrics right at the heart of it. And we've set up a UK leadership hub in agrimetrics, because that data set is really the key to us being able to set the international standard. Get this right, we could take it global, use our aid, trade, security strategy beyond Brexit, go into emerging markets. By 2050, the world has to double food production on the same land area using half as much energy and water. Depressed? I'm not. I think that's a huge opportunity for British science. So we've got 4 brilliant speakers, 2 entrepreneurs, 1 academic, and 1 clean tech financier to talk through their take on this issue. We're going to start on my left, and we're going to go from left to right. Can each of you, very quickly, 30, 45 seconds, just tell us who you are, company, what you do, and then I'll give each of you a chance to chuck out some provocative thoughts.
Okay. I'm Alex Fisher. I'm the founder and CEO of Saturn Bioponics. We specialise in soil-less crop production technology. So that's technology to obviously produce crop completely out of the soil. So it's minimal environmental impact. It's focused on delivering significant productivity increase, so yield increase up to 3 to 4 times per unit area, and reducing those inputs both in terms of cost and obviously resource.
Fantastic.
My name is Will Wells. I'm the CEO and founder of Hummingbird Technologies, and we're an artificial intelligence business for arable farmers. So we use imagery captured by drones, by satellites, by planes, by smartphones, by anywhere. And we help farmers through computer vision and other algorithms to see problems that are invisible to the human eye. The result is that they can apply chemicals in a more responsible and more efficient and productive way. We are the MRI scan, we are the immunotherapy instead of the chemotherapy.
Fantastic.
Peter Mills, Harper Adams University. Many of you, I'm sure, will be aware of us. That those that aren't, it's a small specialist institution focusing on subjects within the rural economy. But it's home to the National Centre for Precision Farming, and we are also a major player in one of the innovation centres that came out of government's Agri-Tech strategy. So the Agri Epicentre is partially based at Harper Adams, where we are focusing with industry on the technologies that we're going to need going forward over the next 10 or 15 years.
Hi, I'm Marcus Waitley from Estover. I'm the one of the 4 of us who wasn't name-checked by the Secretary of State earlier, so I've obviously got to shout louder about what we do. I've come from the energy industry, founded Estover about 10 years ago, looked at lots of different technologies, went with a biomass combined heat and power sort of build and roll out. Here we are, it's been a lot longer, harder, more difficult than we thought the whole process would be, but we've built 70 megawatts of capacity, if that means anything to people, raised about 375 million to build these power plants, which I was delighted to be told they've got an Eiffel Tower's worth of steel in each one, so this gives an idea of the size. We burn about 25% of the UK's sustainable wood fuel. We are now seeing a lot of parallels between the energy industry 10, 20 years ago and the agriculture industry as it is now, and the opportunities for technology and the things that are going to go badly wrong. So more of that in a minute,
Great.
I'm sure.
Thank you. So can I invite each of you to really provoke the conversation? Tell us your sort of 2 or 3 provocative suggestions for this conference on what we really need to do to turbo your businesses and turbo UK leadership in this space.
Me first?
Yeah.
Okay. So my kind of there are a couple of gripes I have, and one of those I think at the moment is that there's this complex perception of what agriculture really is, and for me and in my experience, that is very much it is an industrial thing. You know, food production is industrial. There's a hell of a lot of people to feed, and there's a lot of inefficiencies in the supply chain, but nonetheless, it's still an industrial thing. So I think the focus is about, you know, clean industry versus dirty industry, and where that technology should be going is obviously to transform agriculture from what is still essentially a dirty industry, however people might sort of romantically view it, into a much, much cleaner one with very minimal, it can have very minimal environmental impact. Indeed, it can actually be a very positive impact on an environment. So that I think is one thing, and I think the other thing where I sort of feel in the UK we need to really have a bit of a gear change is in how we translate. I think we're very good, and we've been very fortunate, benefited from this significantly over a number of years with someone like Innovate UK, for example, which has been very much a kind of pioneer in pushing forward development of agricultural technology, is then translating that from being really good inventors as a country, which I think, to be fair, is probably quite true, into actually being good at implementing that in commercial scenarios, which I think at the moment there is almost zero impetus on, and certainly from a kind of governmental point of view, and that's where I feel we are seriously lacking and now have an opportunity, hopefully, to make a big change in.
So great, 2 big points: more leadership on environmental resilience, taking it mainstream in commercial farming,
Yeah.
and secondly, greater urgency on translation and industrial uptake. Great.
My main point on UK leadership is for us to be open-minded about how UK agriculture can put us back onto the world stage as leaders. Yesterday, when Professor Stephen Hawking died, Twitter was ablaze with quotations such as "remember to look up at the stars and not always down at your feet." The reality of my business is that we're 2 years old, and all 30 of my employees came from Imperial College, UCL, DeepMind, Google, the Alan Turing Institute, and that's 3 British data science name-dropping moments already. The point is, we are already leaders in machine learning-based data science solutions. And agriculture is the perfect platform and the perfect backdrop for us to test and improve the sector and fast-track the alleviation of some of the burdens we face. We need more support in terms of ag-tech catalyst innovation funds for businesses with bright ideas, but we also need to encourage farmers to take up the technology. It doesn't always work overnight, and they're being told to do a lot with very thin margins already. And it's actually, a lot of the time, it's the big businesses that are innovating, and they're paying for it out of their own purse. It's not just the small gin manufacturers. So I think on both levels we should be excited about the new era, but we should also be practical about how we help small businesses innovate.
I think there's 2 very big messages in there. One, you touched on skills,
Yeah.
that there's an opportunity for us to create incredibly exciting careers for people, and that we've got to link the supply chain in so that innovation isn't something we do in a silo in the university, but we pull it through big and small businesses.
Okay, so diminishing returns now, and talking from one of those silos. I'm going to take you back 2 or 3 years to the Boston Consulting Group report, which was looking at the main drivers over the next 10 to 15 years in agriculture. And this was a survey across Europe of farmers, and the answer coming back from the end users was that precision farming was going to be the main driver, automation, professionalisation of the industry, and labour. These were all things that were worrying the end users. I think from our perspective at Harper Adams, Brexit has not necessarily changed our agenda, but it may have refocused our priorities, that suddenly labour is rushing up the list of things to be addressed, so automation is higher up the list now. Professionalisation is also something that comes along with the use of technology. I suppose my second point really is just to reinforce what's also been said. Many of you will know that Harper Adams is the home of the hands-free hectare. This is where we have grown a hectare of barley without a human being setting foot in the field, all done through automation. People have talked about this for 20 years. It actually wasn't that difficult to do, but people have talked about it previously. We've now actually done it. We've had more than 600 articles written about this particular experiment across the world in 65 different countries. So it's been invented here, And I suppose our concern at the university is that it's going to be developed somewhere else. And we've already had one approach from a Canadian consortium saying that they are going to put 5 million Canadian dollars into this work. So I suppose my concern is along the lines, invented here, but it is going to probably be developed somewhere else unless we change our attitude to entrepreneurism.
And a big point you made about automation and professionalisation, the quiet revolution that is not properly being recognised, is transforming the industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah, invented here, that's exactly the problem. So, I mean, the good news is that we've got major global pressures here on agriculture. The dietary changes particularly, is going to completely change the demand on the system. Technology is coming, it's going to completely change large swathes of agriculture. So that's happening anyway. Brexit is another layer on top. So the good news is there's sort of going to be change regardless of who does or doesn't do anything. Clearly we've got to make sure it's the right kind of thing. The depressing part is the invented here problem. We're brilliant at inventing stuff. A lot of the energy technologies I looked at and a lot of the agricultural technologies I'm looking at now, we're very good at inventing stuff. I think we're pretty good at commercializing stuff actually, but when it does work, it then gets snapped up overseas, and we end up as a country buying back the actual implementation of that, paying through the nose. Look at energy. There's been a huge push into renewables. A lot of it has happened, but not much of the money for the underlying sort of intellectual property of that is flowing back into the UK and into manufacturing in the UK. So we've got to change that. The other side of it is there are going to be, this is going to transform the landscape in many ways. It's going to transform a lot of what people think about their food and how people think about their food. So it's going to be political, it's going to be emotive, there are going to be heroes and villains. It's very hard to keep the sort of big focus, the sort of big picture, the sort of inevitability, everyone thinking this is going to be a British success story, which is what you need if you're going to have that investment, have the long-term view, have the long-term contracts, have what we want to do, which is invest in big bits of infrastructure to do this. This can't just be everybody falling in on each other. There's got to be some big long-term vision. It doesn't even really matter if it's the right vision or if it's implemented properly. There's just got to be something that everybody can go for and focus on. So those, I think, are
great.
Two.
So the microphone is about to hit you guys. I'm going to ask one question to kick us off, and then let's pass it over. I want to ask you this. If Michael Gove was in this room, the Prime Minister was in the room, the Cabinet, which effectively they are because it's all being recorded and will be written up, what's the policy ask that you'd like this country to grip in order to unleash what you really all talked about the same thing, great tech opportunity, translation challenge, commercialisation, taking it global? Each of you quickly, one plea, please, as you go through this Brexit process, can you put this at the heart of your vision and your policy framework?
I think it is about using, if you like, the funds from the Common Agricultural Policy or whatever, instead of that kind of a subsidy, it's switching that out and looking at that as kind of subsidy and grant kind of thing to help. In fact, Peter and I were talking about this before, but help novel technologies get adopted. So you support those farmers or whatever, the new farmers, existing farmers, whoever it is who wants to be doing, farming, growing food, to adopt those new technologies and de-risk it a bit for them, help them then get other finance backed up by government grant and support and stuff like that. That would be my kind of financial
turn the CAP into an agri-innovation
exactly fund, yeah.
A direct reward for farmers that can show through innovation that they are endorsing environmental stewardship and using less chemical inputs for the same levels of productivity.
Great.
Yeah, I guess very similar in a way, incentivise uptake. We've got a lot of technology that's already available. Mostly we're getting perhaps maximum 20% uptake of existing technology. Let's understand what those barriers are and try and spread that technology to the majority, not the minority.
Great.
For me, it's not a particular policy. It's clarity of purpose. It's giving that view that we can actually really have the confidence to go and do stuff. We're really about, as Estover, building stuff, making long-term investments, operating them, doing things for the long term. We've got to know there is focus. We've got to know which sectors there's going to be focus on and are going to get. It doesn't even matter what particular financial support it is, just policy support. That's the right direction to be looking in.
Okay, great. So floor open. I'm going to suggest that we try and do this within a rough structure and start with the question of how we create a framework that actually incentivizes the uptake of this technology. The one thing this country is brilliant at is developing it in labs and has generally been very bad at pulling it through. The good news is, unlike with my other portfolio, you haven't got the NHS sat in the middle of this one as an obstacle to the uptake of innovation. You've got pretty commercial farmers who've been following signals from the CAP. So can we start with that kind of how we get it pulled through? And then I think there's a conversation about how we take it global and the global leadership. One of the things about Brexit is we come out of the European food tariff framework. Now that must create an opportunity for us to take tech and import. And then I think there's a consumer angle. What Michael Gove was setting out this morning is an attempt to bring everyone together in an inspiring grand coalition. And nowhere is that harder than to give you the hardest of all is the GM debate. Now, I happen to think that the GM debate is a bit old-fashioned. Science has moved on. We're talking about traits. We're not talking about putting a gene from one species into another. We're talking about promoting, enhancing natural genetics for improved. But I think there's a public discourse bit. Can we start with the incentivization, the technology uptake? Yeah, let's take questions in twos or threes. There's three over there, a cluster. Gentleman on the wall. Yeah, let's go 1, 2, and then Robin, I can see there as well. Yeah.
Bruce Tozer. I've done some work for HDB on big data, AI, blockchain, and I've worked all over the world. And one of the biggest inhibitors of uptake of digital technology is mistrust of data and how it's used on the farm. My old colleagues at Rabo said it's what's stopping uptake of technology all over the world, and having a simple set of data standards, principles, and a simple sort of rating tool to help farmers understand how their data is being used, what rewards they get for it, would be a really good thing, and it would give us leadership in that, I think.
Great. Let's come to you, Will, on that. Who was next? There was another.
What do you think about that?
I'll take 3 and then we'll come back to you. Yeah.
Tim Cowan, farmer, but also I run a company called AgriVol, which is trying to take some of the volatility out of soft commodity markets. I think from my own experiences, one of the main issues is actually how you fund this technology. Obviously, you've talked and mentioned the word grant. The grant only covers part of the capital investment. If you're taking a real long-term view, and you take some of the grants that were announced at the end of last year around farm robotics, and, for example, putting in a robotic milking machine. Typically, to milk about 50 cows, you need one robotic milking machine. Milk 100 cows, you need 2 of them. You're talking in the region of about £200,000 there. So a 40% match funding grant still leaves a farmer with 60% to raise themselves. If they're a tenant farmer, they don't have collateral. How do they raise that cash? I think one of the main issues is the government has to think seriously about where does the farmer get the rest of that cash from, and also at an economically realistic interest rate, essentially. Because we can't borrow that money on an HP basis to buy that machinery. We have to buy it outright. Yeah. So I think we're part of the way there, but a lot of farmers hit a brick wall.
I got a really good point, which we'll come to. The third, there was another question on uptake. Was it Robin? Yeah.
Robin Page, farmer and Countryside Restoration Trust chairman. We've heard about an industrial process farming, commercialisation, automation, professionalisation. My question is not the one you want to say, is from this, it sounds to me as if all of you believe that wildlife and landscape are completely irrelevant and stuffed.
Okay, I don't think any of us think that, but it's a really well-made point. Can I take the first point on data trust? I think that's one, Will, and then let's take the really good point about finance, that how a tenant farmer is supposed to finance this technology. Perhaps, Marcus, you could pick that up. And then let's each address Robin's challenge.
I think the data trust thing is actually the responsibility of business. So farmers have been missold technology for years. And the reality of AI is that it's really difficult. And when you've got weather as the biggest variable in your model, it's even harder. So managing expectations and starting with the basics and not trying to implement some silver bullet solution overnight is the absolute key to gaining their trust and hearts and minds.
Marcus, can you pick up the finance point?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's exactly the same problem faced for £60,000 for a farmer as for however many millions for a new piece of sort of production infrastructure. I don't have an answer, but the answer is not matched funding. Matched funding, I think, is a sort of slightly lazy, oh, well, let's do something and we don't have to think too hard because the counterparty's got to find the other half. There've got to be better ways of doing it. You can't asset finance this sort of, the more AI and the more sort of advanced tech you get, the less there is a physical piece of steel that somebody goes, oh, I can just come and take that away if the guy's not paying. So it needs a whole new approach. I completely agree, and that's got to underpin everything. I don't know what it is.
So let's all pick up. I mean, I wanted to get into Robin's challenge really at the end in terms of the consumer
wildlife
proposition.
stuffed.
Yeah.
Can I pick that
Please.
one up? So, fair comment, but I'll push it back in the sense that a lot of the technologies that are being developed now are actually very wildlife friendly. And precision application is designed specifically for that. So if we can put pesticides or herbicides where they're needed instead of broadcasting them everywhere, that is very wildlife friendly. If we don't use large agricultural vehicles on farms, then that is wildlife friendly. We are not compacting the soil, we're not going onto the soil as often as we used to, or we're going on with very small vehicles. So I would argue that some of the technologies that are being developed now will make a quantum leap in the impact that it has on farm wildlife.
Robin, can I, as a politician, pick it up? Because it's a really good challenge. I think unless we break this well-justified but old-fashioned and rather stale idea that innovation and technology is intrinsically antithetical to wildlife and countryside quality, we will completely fail. And I think the reason I'm excited about this is that this is not about a Monsanto monoculture. It's not about some sort of GM prairie farming. It's about precision, quality, accuracy. If we get it right, it's about reassuring the consumer that this apple, this pint of milk has come from a supply chain that is really accurately assessed and industries being properly measured on reducing and incentivized to reduce footprint. I think we confuse politically the narrative of wouldn't you like farming that was using fewer chemicals, moving to biological control systems, using smart control and reassuring you, the consumer, that when you buy, you can buy with trust, particularly here in Britain. I think we confuse that. I know you shake your head and think if it's industrial, it possibly can never be authentically pro-habitat, but I sense that's what this real opportunity is.
I mean, can I add to that? Like, I mean, I think if you build a greenhouse, right? So, as an example, you build a greenhouse. Inside the greenhouse, you have some kind of closed loop system. It's got no interface. It's not interacting in any way with the ground, anything outside that. So that stream or whatever it is that's running past that greenhouse is running as that stream would do if it was just a wilderness effectively outside. It can be a wilderness outside that greenhouse. It can be total biodiversity, totally natural environment. Instead of using 4 times the area, using a quarter, you're using a quarter of that. So there are many things, and it doesn't mean that any industrial process is going to be environmentally friendly, and I completely see that. But I think that done right, it's like all these things. If it's done right with enough thought and it's implemented properly, any of these things can be, you can significantly reduce that impact on the environment, because it isn't that, those farmers are under massive pressure to produce, consistent crop, consistent yields, whatever it might be over the course of the year. Prices are tight, margins are tough, there's a lot of variation. So in the end, of course they're going to do whatever they have to do to try and get it off, because it's their livelihood. So it is an industrial process, and instead of massive soil chemical treatments or sterilization treatments, you can get rid of all that, then that is a massive plus.
Will, can technology help the butterflies?
Well, it can, but I was going to say 2 of my customers, they won't mind me mentioning them, Beeswax Dyson and Overbury Estate, are using 2 centimetre per pixel resolution hyperspectral imagery to map out where birds are nesting in their fields. Now, actually, what we're trying to do is detect disease in their crops, But the environmental stewardship is a byproduct. It's inextricably entwined with better management of crops. I don't think you can separate the two issues.
Next 3 questions. Here we go. Let's go this row second across. Matt, gentleman here, gentleman there. And then we'll get back.
Attention at the back of the mic.
Great. Just here. Gentleman second row here.
Matt Ridley. I was talking to a big international farming business recently, and they are doing all sorts of robotic and precision agriculture stuff in Uruguay, but not in this country. When I asked why not, they said because the phone signal's not good enough in the UK.
Yeah. Phone signal?
Yeah, I've been looking at...
Just say your name.
Alex Murdoch. I'm a emeritus retired professor, but I'm particularly interested in social innovation and food, and I've been looking particularly in America, at localized food, particularly I think maybe in the area that Alex is talking about, growing food in old industrial buildings, for example. And I just wondered, does this represent the beginnings of a new industrial revolution in agriculture, where the association with agriculture with the countryside might be changed?
Fascinating. Urban farming, a new dawn.
Yeah.
And the gentleman here.
Chris Tufnell, Royal Agricultural Society of England and Innovation for Agriculture. I'd like to address the take-up point. Firstly, I think we're all aware that with the change in rural payments, we're going to get a change of personnel on farms. So I think that will inevitably lead to farmers wanting to take these things up. The other thing which is absolutely shown to work in practice, and this industry is brilliant at it, is farmer-to-farmer leads, and basically picking up the farmers that in the 20% and showcasing them to the farmers in the 80% is going to get us way ahead.
Fantastic. Peter, can you pick that up last? Can we take the first question, Will? Yeah. Matt's question about, how do you do digital farming when you've got patchy broadband?
It's a great question. I mean, we're operating live in Brazil now, and we were until this week supposed to be going to Russia to operate this season. We're still doing Ukraine though, so that's a plus. But the reality is it's different everywhere. You sometimes piggyback off 4G. We hustle every trick in the book. We have 50 pilots across this country that sometimes go to McDonald's to upload the data. I mean, it is a moving feast, connectivity and Internet of Things, but it is improving all the time. But it's something that we have to address straight away in rural communities. Otherwise, they don't have access to it.
And if I can just add to that, Matt, you'll be very pleased to hear that government have just given a grant of 4.3 million to a consortium led by Cisco. Includes AgriEpi and Harper Adams, but it's looking at 5G and in particular in rural communities.
Alex, you do bioponics. I mean, the question, does the hydroponics revolution, urban herbs, urban farming, mean the end of a connection between food farming and countryside?
No, is the answer. I think this definition of urban farming is something that's kind of come up. I think it's interesting. Whatever. I think it needs to be redefined and said. The sort of brownfield isn't quite the right word either. But basically, coming off prime agricultural. So if you don't need to produce the crop in the soil, why are you on premium agricultural land, right? Yeah, exactly. So then, yeah. I was in a very industrial, old industrial town last week, looking at this, and integrating. In fact, we were talking about it before with Marcus about, integrating with, if you've got industrial sites that are effectively, wastelands, really. You've got there potentially, heat that's coming off something. You've probably got CO2 that's coming off something. You've got all sorts of resources that you can access that are currently just waste, potentially environmentally damaging waste, on land that you can't really do much with. And I don't think anyone really wants to build houses on it. So, I think that there's a massive opportunity there. I think you always need growers. Well, I'm in the kind of fresh produce end of it, so you always need growers, you always need farmers. There's a lot of. It's not that you kind of knock all this out. I think it's just it's right at the beginning, and there is this new farmer culture, new sites, everything. But it's about in my opinion, it's more about integrating these different parts of the supply chain together, from resource input right the way through to the retailer, to kind of come up with solutions.
I can offer a comment. In Colorado, it's given a new lease of life to marijuana growers. It's starting to move into your area.
I'm interested in that. My constituency is number 1 for poultry, number 3 for pigs, and every week there's a cannabis factory unearthed in an old poultry unit. But I'm not sure if it counts on our GDP. Peter, could you pick up the point about
farmer, yeah,
translation?
Chris, absolutely agree. And you know, I think we do understand that that really is the best way to get information out. And it happens. There's a lot of that happening. You know, your own organisation does a lot of that. There are other organisations in the room that do a lot of that. But of course, there are an awful lot of people to get to. So I think all the time, we're only reaching a relatively small proportion, but we do understand the importance.
That's because we're not using the tech to do it.
No.
Next three questions.
Well, just
Yeah,
finally
sorry,
on that comment, I mean, there is an opportunity in the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund for funding for specifically that type of delivery. So I think we should be getting together to make sure that we do it better than we do now.
Great. Next three. As a gentleman at the back there on the wall.
Okay, thank you.
Lady here.
I'm David Barling from the University of Hertfordshire. We've got a project starting with which is led by Rothamsted shortly, which is European Structural Investment Funded, which is AGRIA, an agricultural research and innovation accelerator. So the idea is to take PhDs with bright ideas, mentor them in the lab or wherever our skill set is, and to get them on their feet. And it raised for me the bigger question, because I'm not sure where they all are, is where are people, if I ask this to Alex and Will, where are the next yous? Where are they and how do we find them?
Where are the next entrepreneurs coming from? Then there's a lady here.
Hi, I'm Ariana. I'm studying at the Center for Food Policy. I think, George, you said this is not another Monsanto reliance situation in the tech that we're talking about now. I understand tech is probably going to be essential to meeting the environmental needs and the food needs we have for the future, but I would like to understand a little bit better how are these high costs that we discussed a little bit with one of the first round of questions with tech and the associated IP rights that are going to come with all the technologies you are developing, not going to put us in a situation of farmers kind of struggling to make this work when they don't have that ownership of what goes into actually growing what we need to eat.
Okay, so the IP question, and thirdly, there was somebody here. Yeah, gentleman here.
Paul Marshall, I just wanted to push on the hydroponics theme. I think I read recently that the CTO of Tesla stepped down to set up a hydroponics firm in California, and he said this is the big new thing. So in other words, bigger than batteries and autonomous cars. I haven't heard the blue sky scenario. We just had a lot of blue sky scenarios in the other room for various things. Can Alex give us the blue sky scenario for hydroponics?
Great, let's take these in reverse order. Alex, blue skies on hydroponics. Then we've got the IP question, which I think, if I hear it right, isn't a world where all these technologies are owned by people going to make it hard for farmers to access them, possibly without being ripped off. I think that's the kind of, it's the sort of Monsanto IP issue applied. Does that apply in agri-tech? And then the first question, where are the next phase of entrepreneurs coming from? Can I pass that one to you? But can you kick off on hydroponics and the next revolution?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of looking at it as a soilless crop production rather than specifically hydroponics. But yeah, I mean, it's not going to be for everything. You know, in my opinion, I don't think you're going to be seeing wheat grown hydroponically, right? I think it's going to have. I could be wrong on that because I've said that about other plants that didn't turn out to be the case for. So, I think for certain slightly higher value stuff, so in the fresh produce realm and things that aren't quite so commoditized, and that's not about cost. That's just about that there's a lot of other factors around that. Yeah, I think we're likely to see a world where premium agricultural land is probably going to be used for growing, bulk arable crop, and because that is the carbohydrate, everything else, starch, all these things. I think for other, so if you look at, there are opportunities for root vegetables, all kinds of vine crops, cane crops, bush crops, all kind of existing compact greenhouse crop, all that. Yeah, I mean my opinion is that 10, 20, 30 years down the track, you'll see very little of that left in the soil. In certain parts of the world, you know, I can't speak for total globally, you know, I don't know what's going to happen in sort of Zimbabwe or, you know, but in Europe, I think almost certainly. In the US, there'd be arguments also. The Far East already, you know, you're looking at...
All of the statements made earlier about land, we can ignore.
Well, I think there is it is important that other things are done with land. It's not, you know, it's not that the only thing that matters is food. No, I would say no.
But doesn't that goes back, I think, to the foresight challenge, isn't it? How can we double food production on the same land area? The answer is keep farming on the land area we've got and take some of the stuff, herbs and other stuff, hydroponic. I mean, it'll be that mix that'll allow us to do it. I think that's what people are thinking. Can I take the question about IP? I think the challenge is, how does IP work in a landscape of multiple farmers? I think it's rooted in the idea that in a Monsanto monoculture, Monsanto own the genetics and you only get the seeds if you use their sprays, which is a sort of Armageddon scenario. But do you see that, Marcus, applying in the agri-tech world?
Well, I think genetic IP is a special case, and actually for everything else, you know, we're talking about things, much though some of the entrepreneurs might like to have monopolies, these aren't going to be monopolies that can be protected in the same way. What we want is a competitive, you know, open commercial environment where people can make investment in things to develop and, you know, sell the technology more cheaply. You know, that's what's ultimately good for the farmers, is if there's competition in the technology providers, you're driving down the price of, you know, whatever the technology is and the advances. That's what we want to have. I don't think people should be afraid of IP, with possibly the exception on the genetic side where it is a different
Can I just add a point? I used to be a director of Elsams, the UK's last family-owned seeds company. And actually plant breeders' rights are really important. If we want to bring on an agri-tech revolution with lots of small breeders, I was trying to get, Elsams is now doing sort of specialist field veg. Ultimately, we could get into heart attack reducing broccoli, you know, health enhancing carrots. You've got to have a framework that helps plant breeders' rights, so that the Percy throwers, you know, the small breeders, the small farming cooperatives can do this stuff and be protected. I think that is an intellectual property challenge that we need to put at the heart of this. Then there was a question...
Is that something that you put into government? Do we have governance to ensure that happens, so that as we're going ahead, we're not facing some of the issues that we got into with the last...
Well, yeah, I can tell you one of the challenges that the plant breeding industry has been shouting at government rightly in the last few years is Europe has been captured by some quite big corporates, and they're putting in place a framework that is not conducive to the little plant breeders. And I think the message I'll take it back to Michael Gove, is we've got to make sure in our Brexit framework that in our innovation we support the little, the innovative, support their ability to commercialise appropriately and to harness value, or else we will simply be dominated by the big. And there was a third...
would you stop them?
Would I stop them?
Would you legislate against the larger players, are you saying?
No, I just think we have to have a framework in the UK. One of the things I think that was antithetical to innovation through the European structure, this is generally, I saw it as in healthcare as well as in agri-tech, is that the policy-making system is very dominated by those people with big enough budgets to lobby in the corridors. And we need to put in place a framework that supports the little guy and the small innovators.
Sorry, the challenge for this is that Monsanto is looking at vertical farming.
Yeah, so the answer to your question is no, I wouldn't. This isn't part of an anti-big business. We've just got to make sure that the framework allows the innovators to come through as well. And quite often government tends to find it quite easy to legislate on behalf of the big companies who lobby them.
Yeah, question on talent.
Yeah.
I would actually argue that it is everywhere. We just have to promote the sector as a platform for some of the coolest technology around. My top data scientist came from Deliveroo, because delivering pizzas to 9 families in Notting Hill on a Saturday was not as exciting as feeding 9 billion people by 2050. The second is that too much talent and IP is locked in the ground floor basement of Rothamsted and all these research institutions that all fight for the same bit of cake, and not enough of it's out there on farm. And the third is a practical thing, which is we've got to address the elephant in the room, which is that it is this UK farming is not conducive to a young farming entrepreneur going out and starting something. Now, I think that it's not as directly simple as saying, oh, the big estates should somehow suffer as a consequence, because ultimately the big estates are the one that are trialing all of this stuff anyway. So I think we have to think harder about that elephant in the room, and try and encourage more people, not just from the tech side, because it's easy for me to start a business, but you should persuade the young farmers to start one as well.
I think I've had a 2-minute warning, so can I ask for a show of hands, and we'll take any and all last questions. There's a gentleman here at the back, there's a gentleman there on the right on the back row, gentleman here on the front. I feel like an auctioneer, I'll take a 4th bid. Sotheby's, gentleman here.
Charlie Colchester, Epiphany Trust. The biggest question I have so far in this conference is that I have never heard anybody mention the Commonwealth. And it seems to me that it is a giant agricultural opportunity which is post-Brexit coming over the horizon. And there really needs to be something done about that, because we have a special relationship with these people, 2 billion of them.
Can I ask, what do you see the opportunity that you want to...
Well, I think it's right across the board. But I mean, the point is that they feel very deeply committed to us as countries. Yeah. And that means that we have an opportunity given to us.
Great. The Commonwealth opportunity question, and then the gentleman in the back.
There, Doug Flynn from Systemic. Will, you talked about the talent question. What, and some challenges that are actually currently preventing success in this space, what are the interventions that can be supportive from investment or technical support perspective to allow these businesses to succeed and thrive?
Commonwealth, tech support. Gentleman here on the front, the gentleman in the tweed jacket here.
Charlie Weiss-Smith, I write about farming issues both here and in Africa. One of the things that strikes me is that there's no other way of life as varied and diverse as farming, from tiny farmers to huge farmers. And I can see there's plenty of farmers who are very innovative and they're easy to reach, and you were implying that it's the larger businesses who are using drones for precision agriculture, for example. How are you going to reach the more conservative end of the farming industry? And there is a very conservative end.
Great question. How do we reach the conservative end? I ask myself that question every day. And gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Marlon Tabby. I come from a company called Wesaf Energy Solutions. And in terms of the talent question, I'm in the same boat as these guys. I'm developing an agricultural project, but in Africa. And when you turn it round and you say it's invented here, we're going to take your technology there because it works there. And the Commonwealth question as well, because we have a special relationship with you guys, and we're going to look what's being done here, and persons like myself who are educated here are the link. But the elephant in the room is the financing question. It's now so difficult for the young entrepreneurs like ourselves to get the backing we need to make these things happen. It's probably a lot harder for the young British farmers as well, because there's so many other places to go to.
Great, thank you very much. Can I start, Marcus? Can I ask each of you to give a last comment dealing with any or all of those last, so the last 60 seconds, starting with Marcus.
I'd say the IP, the technology, how do you get people to invest, the good news is it's not just agriculture, it's the sort of tech industry across the UK. We've got to have a framework that lets people do that. You get out by word of mouth, you reach the conservative farmers by word of mouth, but they've got to have the underpinnings, the financial underpinnings that let them do that. And it's a bigger problem post-Brexit, and we've got to have the financing structure in place.
Peter, particularly the Commonwealth and the conservative farmers question. You run an agricultural college. How do we go global?
University.
University. Thank you.
Not that I'm sensitive. Commonwealth, it's patchy. It's happening. There are lots of things that are going on in developing countries. It's exactly the same there as it is here. We need to train people appropriately, and we need to form collaborations and get involved in worthwhile projects. Some of that's already happening. It's probably not happening enough.
Great.
On the financing point, use London as a fantastic place for angel networks, incubators, online seeding platforms. Test your idea, talk to customers, get your pitch sorted. I don't think you'll struggle if you get the basics right. It's one of the best places to get a business funded. You've just got to look out there and see what's available to you. And on the Commonwealth, spot on. We got approached by the government of South Australia to go there, and we'll be doing the same to Canada this year. It has to be a global opportunity, even when at a very small size.
On the Commonwealth thing, I mean, there is an organisation, it's a Commonwealth Export Group, which I think I may be the only agricultural member of, but nonetheless it is there, and you know, they are pushing hard. I think it's a conference in a couple of weeks here for 3 days, which is a whole load of different Commonwealth government leaders and business people, and bring that all together. And it is interesting. It's a great networking opportunity. I think that threads into the question about financing, which your question, and actually I think your question are sort of linked. I mean, supporting small farmers or supporting, you know, projects in countries where the financial system isn't necessarily as developed as it is here. To be honest, it's not that developed here for agriculture. So it's not that there is a massive problem in funding innovative agriculture, full stop, everywhere. So if you can spin it as a development project, fine. If you can spin it as something else, but just straight up, there is a big problem. So I don't have the answer, but maybe George does.
Great. Well, look, can I...
On that note...
Yeah. Can I try and wrap up? And the message I think that's coming out of this room is this is a huge opportunity. It's also a challenge, because if we don't, to Robin's challenge, both politicians like Michael and I tell a story, but also make it real, that this is a chance to make technology work for the benefit of the environment and productivity, modern progressive farming that takes its footprint responsibilities really seriously, and that does mean butterflies, birds, hedges. Most people want to buy food that is supporting and supportive of a good landscape, a good environment, albeit that urban hydroponics might have a different customer offer. That there's a real ambition, and we have to get that offer right. Huge opportunities in technology, both as an industry for Britain to lead, but we've got to get the skills right, the finance right, the incentive framework right. We've got to get away from the CAP, rather crudely just telling people what to do and supporting them to do what it says, and create a framework where consumers are empowered through a market to drive the quality of produce they want, and farmers are able to access the technology easily. And a big global opportunity. Commonwealth and more broadly, the world is going to need farming technology big time in the next 20, 30 years. At the risk of going all Martin Luther King on you, I have a dream that in 10 years, 20 years, I'm able to say to my children, you had to be there. It was an incredibly divisive moment. Britain tore ourselves into a sort of frenzy of blaming everyone else, and then we woke up and smelled the coffee. We did Brexit. We realised it was up to us. We came together. We gripped our global role in the world. We're not a military superpower, but we are a science superpower. We gave the city something real to finance. We used our aid, our trade, and our security agenda to go out around the world, did some development partnerships, took agri-tech, clean tech, biotech, digital health, accelerated development, grew our soft power footprint, and then we sold them Scotch salmon, whiskey, accountancy, and all the other things we do. And actually, we only had 20 destroyers, but we parked each one off a place that we were looking after. And we've used our global role to be a force for good in a 21st century agricultural... Finally, you're a tough audience. Not since I spoke to the Conservative Yorkshire boycott group I met a harder audience.
We haven't got 20 destroyers, never mind.
Can I ask you just to thank our four speakers who've answered your questions beautifully.